Ilara Vance spent 20 years believing I was nothing. In a world where strength is measured by the sharpness of your claws and the rank of your blood, I was a ghost. An orphan, an omega, a girl who couldn't even shift into a wolf. But tonight was supposed to be the night that changed everything. Tonight was the blood moon coronation, the night the new Alpha King, Fenris the Cruel, would take his throne. They said the moon goddess would reveal his fated mate during the ceremony to ensure the kingdom's prosperity. I was just there to serve the wine, hidden in the shadows of the pillars until the scent hit me. It was an explosion of sandalwood, sea salt, and ancient crushing power. My heart didn't just beat, it thundered. My inner wolf, a creature I thought was dead, let out a howl so loud I was sure the whole room could hear it. I looked toward the dais and my eyes met his. Fenris. His eyes were a piercing, predatory blue, scanning the crowd with a hunger that made my skin crawl and burn all at once. The golden bond, the invisible thread of the universe, snapped into place, connecting my heart to his. He was my mate. The Alpha King was mine. The music died. The laughter of the high-born lords and ladies withered into a suffocating silence. Fenris stood from his throne, his heavy velvet cloak sweeping behind him like a shadow. He didn't look at me with love. He didn't look at me with relief. He looked at me with a disgust so visceral it felt like a physical blow. "I know you are here," he boomed, his voice vibrating through the stone floor. "I can smell your scent, thin and pathetic as it is. Step forward, mate." I stumbled out from behind the pillar. My hands were shaking and my simple servant's dress felt like a shroud. Thousands of eyes tracked my movement, eyes filled with mockery. I could hear the whispers. "An omega? Servant? This is the queen." I reached the edge of the dais, looking up at him, searching for a flicker of the warmth the stories promised. "Fenris," I whispered, my voice breaking. I didn't know it would be you." He didn't move. He stood there like a statue of ice, his lip curling in a sneer. "You didn't know? Or you hoped I would be blinded by the bond? Look at yourself, Ilara. You are a nameless nobody. A glitch in the system. I am the king of the 7 territories. My bloodline is the purest in history. I need a queen who can lead armies, a woman whose very presence commands the stars. You can barely carry a tray of wine without trembling." He stepped closer, leaning down so only I could hear the venom in his breath. "You are a mistake and I don't tolerate mistakes." He straightened his back, projecting his voice to the very rafters of the hall. "Hear me, pack. Hear me, ancestors. I, Alpha King Fenris of the Blood Moon Pack, find this woman unworthy. I find this bond an insult to my crown and a threat to our strength. I will not be tethered to a weakling." He raised his hand, and I felt the air grow heavy with the weight of an alpha's command. "I, Fenris, formally and eternally reject you, Ilara Vance, as my mate and my queen. I sever the cord. I burn the bridge. From this moment on, you are nothing to me but a memory of a failure." A scream tore from my throat, but it wasn't just a sound. It was the feeling of my soul being ripped in two. A searing, white-hot pain erupted on my neck, right where the mating mark should have formed. It felt like liquid fire was being poured into my veins. I collapsed to the marble floor, clutching my chest, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The rejection bond was a poison, a dark magic that usually killed the weaker mate. I looked up through blurred vision, hoping for a sign of regret, but Fenris simply turned his back on me. "Get her out of my sight," he commanded his guards, his voice bored as if he were disposing of trash. "And Ilara? If you are still within my borders by sunrise, my warriors will hunt you down. I do not allow strays to linger in my kingdom." The guards grabbed my arms, dragging me across the cold stone while the court laughed. My dignity was gone. My home was gone. My mate had just sentenced me to a slow, agonizing death. I didn't wait for the sun. I ran. I ran through the palace gates, past the outer walls and deep into the whispering woods. The rain began to fall, a cold, torrential downpour that soaked through my thin dress and chilled me to the bone. I fell by the edge of the black stream, the boundary line of the kingdom. My heart was failing. I could feel my wolf fading, her whimpers growing quieter and quieter as the rejection took hold. I stared into the dark, rushing water, ready to let the darkness take me. But then something shifted. The pain didn't stop, but it changed. It grew hotter, fiercer, turning from a dull ache into a roaring furnace. Deep inside me, in a place the rejection couldn't reach, a golden light began to glow. My reflection in the water changed. My eyes didn't look like mine anymore. They weren't brown. They were a brilliant, celestial gold, the color of the ancient alphas, the gods of the old world. I wasn't an omega. I had never been an omega. I was something so powerful that my body had spent 20 years trying to hide it just to keep me safe. I stood up, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel weak. The rain didn't feel cold. I looked back toward the palace, toward the man who had just tried to break me. Fenris wanted a queen of power. He had the most powerful being in the world in his hands, and he threw her away because he was too arrogant to see the truth. I placed my hand over my stomach, feeling a tiny second heartbeat pulsing there, a secret gift from a broken bond. "You want me to be a ghost, Fenris?" I whispered into the wind. "Fine. I will be the ghost that haunts your legacy. But one day you will realize that you didn't just reject a mate. You rejected the only thing that could have saved you." I crossed the stream, leaving the blood moon pack behind. I was no longer a Lara the servant. I was a Lara, the mother of a king, and the woman who would watch Fenris's world burn from the throne he didn't know I deserved. 5 years. I would give myself 5 years to grow, to hide, and to plan. And when I returned, it wouldn't be for his love. It would be for his crown. 5 years. They say time heals all wounds, but they lie. Time only hardens the scars until they become armor. I stood on the balcony of a small stone cottage nestled deep within the neutral territories, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air here didn't smell like the suffocating charcoal of the Alpha King's forge. It smelled of pine, wild lavender, and the scent of the boy sleeping inside, my son Leo. He was the living proof of that night 5 years ago, the only beautiful thing to come out of a brutal rejection. Every time I looked at him, I saw Fenris's piercing blue eyes, but in his soul he carried my fire. For 5 years I lived as a ghost. I changed my name, hidden my scent with mountain herbs, and worked as a simple healer in a village that didn't care for pack politics. To the world I was just a widow with a quiet child. But inside I was evolving. The golden power that awakened the night I was cast out had grown into a roaring sun. I could hear the heartbeat of the forest. I could feel the shift in the wind before it arrived. I wasn't just a wolf anymore. I was becoming something the histories had forgotten. And I knew, deep in my marrow, that the peace I had built was about to shatter. Reports had been trickling into the village for months. The Blood Moon Kingdom was dying. Without a true mate to balance the Alpha King's soul, the land itself had turned toxic. The crops were failing, the winters were lasting 6 months, and the wolves were turning feral. Fenris had tried to force a bond with a highborn lunar lady, a woman named Lady Selene, but the moon goddess cannot be cheated. The kingdom was starving for a queen it had lost, and the king was losing his mind. They called him the Mad King now. He was a shadow of the man who had stood on that dais, his wolf taking over as his humanity slipped away. "Mommy?" I had the dream again. I turned to see Leo standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. My heart tightened. 4 months he had been dreaming of a great white wolf trapped in a cage of ice. He didn't know he was dreaming of his father's soul. I knelt down, tucking a stray hair behind his ear. "It's okay, Leo. It's just the wind in the trees." But as I spoke, the air outside grew heavy. The birds stopped singing. A familiar, terrifying scent began to drift through the window, sandalwood and sea salt, but now tainted with the metallic tang of blood and desperation. I stood up, pushing Leo behind me. Through the trees I saw them. Black horses, silver armor, and the crest of the Blood Moon pack. They weren't supposed to be this far into the neutral territories. The lead rider dismounted, his movements jagged and weary. It was Commander Jax, Fenris's most loyal warrior. He looked older, his face etched with the exhaustion of a man who had been searching for a miracle in a graveyard. He didn't recognize me at first. How could he? I wasn't the trembling servant in a torn dress anymore. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my presence filling the clearing. "Healer," Jax croaked, his voice raw. "We were told a powerful healer lived in these woods." Our king, he is fading. The blood sickness has taken him. He won't survive the next full moon. I felt a cold shiver of satisfaction, followed immediately by a pang of the bond one thought I had severed. It was still there, a thin, pulsing wire of pain connecting me to a dying man. I looked at Jax, my eyes narrowing. The Alpha King has a palace full of healers and the finest doctors in the 7 territories. Why come to a woman in the woods? Jax took a step forward, his eyes pleading. Because he isn't just physically ill. His wolf is eating him alive from the inside. He rejected his fated mate 5 years ago, and the goddess is punishing the entire bloodline. We need someone with ancient blood. Someone who can calm the beast. He paused, his eyes widening as he finally looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the curve of my jaw, the steady gold flicker in my gaze. His breath hitched. It can't be. Alara. I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I reached out and gripped the hilt of the small hunting knife at my belt. Alara Vance died in the rain 5 years ago, Commander. You're looking at someone else. But then the door behind me creaked open. Leo, curious and brave, stepped out into the light. The commander's eyes dropped to the boy and I watched the color drain from his face. He didn't need a DNA test. He didn't need a scent. He saw the Alpha King's eyes staring back at him from the face of a 5-year-old child. A prince, Jax whispered, falling to his knees in the dirt. A true heir. The kingdom is saved. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that echoed through the trees. The kingdom is not saved, Commander. My son is not a tool for your politics and I am not a cure for a king who called me a mistake. Tell Fenris that if he wants to live he can rot on his throne of bone. He told me to be a ghost and ghosts don't save drowning men. But as I spoke, a low, guttural howl ripped through the forest, miles away but loud enough to shake the leaves from the trees. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, the cry of a wolf who had lost everything and was begging for death. The bond in my chest flared, a white-hot spike of energy that knocked me back. Leo gasped, clutching his own chest, his eyes glowing a faint gold. He was connected to him too. My son was suffering because his father was dying. I looked at my son, then at the desperate commander at my feet. I realized then that my exile was over. Not because I wanted to save Fenris, but because I wouldn't let his madness destroy my child's future. I looked at Jax, my voice turning to steel. I will come. But not as a healer and not as a subject. I come as the alpha of my own life. If your king survives my touch, it will be because I allow it. Get the horses. We're going back to the place where he broke me and this time he's the one who will learn to crawl. The journey back to the Blood Moon Palace was a silent march through a dying world. As we crossed the border, the sky turned a bruised purple, and the trees stood like skeletal fingers clawing at the air. The vibrant kingdom I remembered was gone, replaced by a wasteland of gray mist and bitter cold. The soldiers rode with their heads down, their spirits broken, but I rode with my head high, Leo tucked securely in front of me. He watched the passing shadows with wide, golden eyes, sensing the darkness that had settled over his father's lands. When the palace gates finally groaned open, the sound was like a death rattle. There were no trumpets, no cheering crowds. Only a handful of gaunt servants watched from the shadows as we entered the courtyard. I dismounted, my boots striking the stone with a finality that made the guards flinch. 5 years ago I was dragged out of these gates in chains of shame. Today I walked through them as the only person who could stop the apocalypse. Where is he? I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy fog. Commander Jax gestured toward the high tower, the king's private chambers. He has locked himself away for weeks, my lady. He grows violent if anyone approaches. The blood sickness has reached his heart. He doesn't even recognize his own name anymore. I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed a lantern and began the climb, the spiral stairs feeling like a descent into the underworld. With every step, the scent of sandalwood grew stronger, but it was sour now, thick with the smell of decay and madness. I pushed open the heavy iron doors of the royal suite. The room was in shambles. Gold tapestries had been shredded to ribbons, and the massive oak furniture lay splintered across the floor. In the center of the room, hunched in the shadows, was a beast. He wasn't in his wolf form, but he wasn't human either. Fenris sat on the floor, his skin pale and etched with black veins that pulsed with every ragged breath. His hair was long and matted, and his claws had dug deep grooves into the stone beneath him. "Stay back," a voice growled, but it wasn't a man's voice. It was the sound of a predator at the end of its rope. Fenris lifted his head, and for a second, I felt a flicker of the old fear. His blue eyes were bloodshot, swirling with a frantic, feral energy. He looked at me, but he didn't see me. He saw an intruder. He lunged, moving with a speed that would have killed a normal woman, his hands snapping out to catch my throat. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my hands to defend myself. I let my own power flare, not the power of a wolf but the power of the ancient. A shock wave of golden light erupted from my skin, hitting him like a physical wall. Fenris slammed back against the wall, gasping as the divine energy forced his feral side to retreat. He slumped to the ground, his eyes clearing for the first time in years. He blinked, staring at my face, his breath hitching in his chest. "Elara," he whispered, his voice a broken rasp. I'm dreaming. The goddess has finally sent a vision to mock me before I die." He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers stopping just inches from my cheek. "I killed you." I felt the bond snap. I felt the silence in my soul. I deserve this darkness. I looked down at him, my heart a cold stone. "You didn't kill me, Fenris. You just made the mistake of thinking I was small. I didn't come here to forgive you, and I didn't come here to be your queen." I stepped back, signaling toward the doorway. Leo stepped into the room, his small boots clicking on the stone. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it would break the floor. Fenris froze. He looked at the boy, at the miniature version of himself standing there with my defiance in his eyes. The black veins on Fenris's skin began to recede, drawn back by the pure, untainted bloodline standing before him. "A son," Fenris breathed, a single tear tracking through the dirt on his face. "I have a son. He is mine," I said, my voice like ice. "He is the only reason you are still breathing. Your kingdom is rotting, Fenris, and your sickness is hurting him through the bond. I am going to heal you, but understand this. When you wake up, you will realize that the power in this room no longer belongs to you. You rejected the mate, but you cannot reject the queen I have become." I walked forward and placed my hand on his forehead. The sparks that flew between us weren't the sweet heat of a new romance. They were the lightning of a storm. As my golden light flooded into his body, burning away the black rot of the rejection, Fenris let out a guttural cry of agony and relief. The palace shook, the very foundations groaning as the king's soul was forced back into his body. But as he looked up at me, his eyes full of a desperate newfound hope, I pulled my hand away. I saw the look of a man ready to beg for a second chance. I leaned down, my voice a lethal whisper. "Don't look at me with love, Fenris. You haven't earned the right to even say my name. The healing is finished, but the reckoning? That's only just begun." The sun rose over the Blood Moon Palace for the first time in years without the choking veil of gray mist. The black veins had vanished from Fenris's skin, leaving him restored. But the man who stood up from that shattered floor was not the arrogant king who had cast me out. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger, then he looked at me with a hunger that made my blood simmer. It wasn't the hunger of a predator anymore. It was the look of a man who had seen the sun after a lifetime in a cave. "Elara," he croaked, taking a tentative step toward me. "The bond. I can feel it again. It's stronger than before. It's like a roar in my ears. Please let me." I held up a single hand and the air between us crackled with golden static. He stopped instantly, his wolf whining deep in his chest. A king accustomed to absolute obedience was now being brought to his knees by a flicker of my fingers. "Do not mistake my mercy for a reunion, Fenris. I healed you so my son would not feel your death throes. I did it for his blood, not your heart." I turned my back on him and walked to the balcony, looking out over the courtyard. Below, the palace was in chaos. Word had spread that the healer had returned, and that a child with the king's eyes was walking the halls. But there was something else. In the distance, beyond the palace walls, a different sound was rising. It wasn't the sound of the Blood Moon Pack. It was the rhythmic thud of drums and the howling of wolves that didn't belong to this territory. Fenris walked up behind me, keeping a respectful distance, his blue eyes narrowing as he looked toward the horizon. "Who is that?" "Those aren't my scouts. That's a war party." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that never reached my eyes. "Those are the strays you warned me about, Fenris. During my 5 years in the neutral territories, I didn't just hide. I gathered. Every Omega you discarded, every lone wolf you exiled, every weak shifter you deemed unworthy, they found me. We are the pack of the Gilded Sun, and they are here for their alpha." His face went pale. He realized then that I hadn't come back alone. I had brought an army of the forgotten to his very doorstep. "You created a rival pack?" "Within my borders." I turned to face him, my golden eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. "Your borders mean nothing to the earth. You told me to leave because I was a stain on your lineage. Now I am the light that reveals how dirty your throne has become. If you want your kingdom to survive, you will open the gates. You will house my people. And you will sit at the table not as a king but as a petitioner." The doors to the chamber burst open and Lady Selene, the woman Fenris had tried to replace me with, stormed in. Her face was twisted in a mask of fury, her high-born scent of artificial lilies clashing with the raw power in the room. "What is this? Fenris, why is this servant in your rooms? And whose brat is this?" She pointed a trembling finger at Leo. Before she could take another breath, I moved. I didn't shift, I didn't need to. I blurred across the room, my hand catching her by the throat and pinning her against the wall. "The next time you speak of my son," I whispered, my voice vibrating with the power of the first alphas, "I will rip the tongue from your mouth and feed it to the crows. I am Elara the Ancient, and you are standing in a room with 2 kings and a goddess. Know your place." I released her and she slumped to the floor, gasping and sobbing in terror. Fenris didn't move to help her. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on me, filled with a terrifying mixture of awe and regret. He was realizing that the Omega he rejected was the most dangerous creature he had ever met. "You've changed," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I have spent 5 years hating myself, Elara. I thought I was choosing my pack over a girl. I didn't know I was choosing death over life. Tell me what I have to do. I'll give you the crown. I'll abdicate. Just don't look at me with that hatred." I walked over to Leo, who was watching the scene with a calm, royal silence. I picked him up, feeling his small heart beating steadily against mine. "The crown is just a piece of gold, Fenris. I have enough gold in my veins to buy your entire history," I said, heading for the door. "If you want to earn a place in this family, start by being the king your people actually need. My pack stays in the North Wing. We are not your guests, we are your equals. And Fenris, if you ever try to use the mate bond to influence me, I will sever it myself. And this time I won't be the one who dies." I left him standing in the wreckage of his room, a king with a restored body, but a soul that was finally, truly beginning to burn. The piece inside the palace was a fragile glass sculpture, ready to shatter at the slightest breath. My pack, the Gilded Sun, occupied the North Wing, their presence a constant reminder to the Blood Moon elites that the world had changed. I sat in the war room, staring at a map of the 7 territories, while Leo played with a wooden wolf on the rug at my feet. The door creaked open and Fenris entered. He looked different. He had trimmed his beard and wore simple leather instead of his heavy royal robes. He looked like a warrior again, but his scent was heavy with a sorrow he couldn't hide. "The scouts returned from the Iron Ridge," Fenris said, his voice low as he leaned over the table, careful not to crowd my space. "It's not just a drought or a bad winter, Elara. There's a shadow moving through the northern pass. It's the hollowed, wolves who have completely lost their souls to the darkness. They are coming and they are thousands strong." I looked at the map, my golden sight seeing the veins of black energy crawling across the paper. The rejection hadn't just weakened Fenris. It had ripped a hole in the spiritual veil of the world, and now the monsters were crawling through. "They are coming for the source," I replied, my fingers tracing the line of the blood moon borders. "They are coming for the ancient blood. They are coming for us." Fenris looked at me, his blue eyes searching mine with a desperation that made my pulse flicker. "Alara, I know I have no right to ask. I know I am a ghost of a man to you. But if the palace falls, the boy falls. Let me fight for you. Not as your king but as your shield. I will stand at the front gates until there is nothing left of me but bone." I stood up, walking toward him until we were inches apart. The mate bond screamed, a wild, hungry thing that wanted me to forgive him, to sink into his arms and let the past burn away. But I was the queen of the forgotten, and I wouldn't betray the woman who had bled in the rain 5 years ago. "You think dying is enough, Fenris? Death is easy. Living with the weight of what you did, that is the real penance." I reached out, my fingers hovering over the scar on his chest where my power had healed him. "You will fight. But you will not die. I won't let my son lose a father twice." The alarm horns suddenly wailed from the watchtowers, a long, mournful sound that signaled the end of the world. We ran to the ramparts, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. The horizon was gone. A wall of pitch-black smoke was rolling toward us, and within it, thousands of glowing red eyes flickered. The hollowed were here. They were creatures of nightmare, skin stretched thin over bone, their howls sounding like the screams of the damned. The Blood Moon warriors stood on the walls, their hands trembling, their spirits still dampened by years of misery. "They won't hold," Fenris whispered, drawing his heavy silver broadsword. "They've lost their faith." I looked at him, then at the north wing where my people were already shifting, their golden fur shimmering in the twilight. "Then give them something to believe in." I stepped onto the very edge of the stone battlement, the wind whipping my hair around my face. I didn't shift into a common wolf. I closed my eyes and reached deep into the earth, calling upon the celestial fire that had saved me in the woods. A pillar of golden light erupted from me, soaring into the dark sky and shattering the clouds. My skin began to glow like a fallen star, and a crown of white flames flickered above my head. Below in the courtyard, every wolf, blood moon and gilded sun alike, fell to their knees. The power was so immense that even the hollowed paused in their tracks. I wasn't just a mate or a healer. I was the avatar of the moon herself. "Fight," I commanded, my voice echoing like thunder across the valley. "Fight for the ground you stand on. Fight for the queen who came back from the dead." Fenris let out a roar that shook the towers, his own wolf finally finding its strength in my light. He leaped from the ramparts, shifting midair into a massive midnight black wolf, hitting the ground with the force of a meteor. He tore into the front lines of the hollowed, a whirlwind of teeth and claws, fighting with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. I watched him go, my heart clenching in a way I hated. He was fighting for his life, but he was also fighting for my gaze. I turned to the sky, raising my hands as the first wave of shadows hit the palace walls. The battle for the 7 territories had begun, and as the darkness closed in, I realized that the only way to save the future was to finally deal with the ghosts of the past. Fenris was down there, bleeding for a kingdom that had once turned its back on me. I dived into the fray, my golden flames incinerating the shadows, knowing that by the time the sun rose, only one thing would be certain. The world would never forget the name Alara Vance. The sky was no longer blue. It was a bruised, bleeding red. The palace courtyard had become a graveyard of shadows as the hollowed poured over the walls like a tide of ink. I stood in the center of the carnage, my golden light flickering. Every time I struck down a shadow, 2 more rose from the darkness. I could feel my strength waning, the ancient power demanding a price my mortal body could barely pay. Through the smoke and the screams, I searched for the one scent that still anchored me to this world. I found him near the great gate. Fenris was unrecognizable. His midnight fur was matted with black blood, his side torn open by the jagged claws of a hollowed general. He was surrounded, a lone king fighting a losing battle to keep the shadows away from the tower where our sun was hidden. He was slowing down. I saw a shadow blade rise behind him, aimed directly at his heart, the heart he had finally begun to use. "Fenris!" I screamed. I didn't calculate the cost. I threw my remaining power across the distance, a bolt of pure solar fire that incinerated the shadow warrior before it could strike. but the effort left me empty. I fell to my knees, the golden glow fading from my skin, the world spinning into gray. The leader of the Hollowed, a towering wraith of smoke and spite, loomed over me, sensing my weakness. It raised a hand of frost, ready to extinguish the last light of the ancients. Suddenly, a massive weight slammed into the wraith. Fenris, in his human form now, battered and bleeding, had thrown himself between me and the darkness. He didn't have his sword. He didn't have his crown. He only had his body. He wrapped his arms around the wraith, his skin searing as the cold darkness touched him. "Go, Ilara," he gasped, his voice thick with blood. "Take Leo and run. You were right. I am a mistake. But let me be a mistake that saves the world." In that moment, the last wall around my heart crumbled. I saw him, not as the king who rejected me, but as the man who was willing to be erased so I could breathe. The bond, which had been a source of pain for 5 years, suddenly shifted. It wasn't a chain, it was a bridge. I reached out and grabbed his hand. "No, Fenris," I whispered, my voice echoing with a power that wasn't mine alone. "We don't die today. We finish this together." As our skin touched, the circuit closed. My ancient light flooded into his alpha blood, and his raw, physical strength anchored my celestial energy. We weren't two broken halves anymore. We were a singular, unstoppable force. A pillar of white and gold fire erupted from our joined hands, expanding outward in a massive shockwave. It swept through the courtyard, through the palace, and across the entire kingdom. The Hollowed didn't just die. They were unmade, turned back into dust and memory by the purity of a restored bond. Silence fell over the Blood Moon Kingdom. The red sky cleared, revealing a dawn so bright it hurt to look at. The shadows were gone. The rot was gone. I looked at Fenris. He was trembling, leaning his forehead against mine, his breath coming in ragged hitches. For the first time, the blue of his eyes was clear. No madness, no pride, only an ocean of devotion. "You saved us," he breathed. "No," I corrected, pulling back just enough to look at the palace where Leo was being led out by Jax. "We saved him." Weeks later, the reconstruction began. The two packs, the Blood Moon and the Gilded Sun, did not merge into one. They lived side by side, a new world built on the ruins of the old. I sat on a new throne, carved from the white oak of the neutral territories, placed exactly level with the king's. Fenris stood beside me, not as my master, but as my consort and my fiercest protector. He had spent every day since the battle trying to earn a smile, a touch, a word of kindness. He knew the path to forgiveness was long, and he was content to walk it for the rest of his life. Leo ran through the throne room, his golden eyes sparkling as he practiced his first shifts, a small white wolf cub tumbling over the rugs. Fenris watched him with a pride so deep it seemed to ache. He turned to me, reaching out a hand, hesitating before his fingers brushed mine. "The people are asking for a celebration, Ilara. A coronation for the true queen." I looked at his hand, then up at his face. I didn't take his hand, not yet, but I didn't pull away. I stood up, looking out over the kingdom that was finally thriving, the air smelling of sandalwood, sea salt, and hope. "They don't need a coronation to know who their queen is, Fenris. And I don't need a crown to know my worth." I walked toward the balcony, the sun warming my skin. "But we can have a feast. For the strays, the omegas, and the king who finally learned how to see." Fenris followed me into the light, a half-smile finally breaking through his scarred features. The Alpha King had been humbled, the true mate had been restored, and the legend of the White Wolf and her king was only just beginning. We were no longer a story of rejection. We were a story of what happens when the moon decides that even the darkest heart deserves a second chance to find the light.